What happens when the NBA's most volatile rebounder joins the league's most demanding superstar? On October 3, 1995, the Bulls flipped backup center Will Perdue for Dennis Rodman, a player fresh off refusing huddles, missing practices, and even taking off his shoes mid-game in San Antonio. By June 1996, the result looked like destiny. But how did it actually work? We'll trace the key moments that defined the season. The missed practices, the neon hair, the late nights, and the 14.9 rebounds per game that broke opponents' backs. Start with the trade. How does a contender swap a 7-footer for chaos and expect to get better? It starts with a move that looked reckless on paper. On October 3, 1995, Chicago sent Will Perdue to San Antonio and brought in Dennis Rodman. The move landed like a thunderclap because everyone remembered what had just happened in Texas. Rodman left a trail of fines, skipped huddles, was benched in the playoffs for insubordination, missed practices with his whereabouts unknown, and clashed with coach Bob Hill and franchise star David Robinson. He'd been suspended for insubordination. The Bulls had finished 47-35 after Michael Jordan's return from baseball, and then fell to Orlando, a letdown by their standards, and a clear sign they needed muscle on the glass and an edge on defense. Even inside the locker room, the mood was guarded. Michael Jordan had questions. Scottie Pippen had them too. Jerry Krause, though, saw value where the market flinched. Rebounding wins possessions, and possessions win series. The noise around Rodman had cooled demand to a trickle. Contemporary reports said only 4 or 5 teams even kicked the tires, so the price dropped to a backup center San Antonio, eager to move on and wary of losing him for nothing, needed a clean exit. Krause believed Rodman's elite skill was mispriced because of the headlines around him. Phil Jackson, who had managed personalities for years, felt a defined role, and clear expectations could turn volatility into fuel. You take into account all that goes on. You have to take risks in this business. We know what we want to accept, Jackson said. The plan wasn't to reform Rodman's identity, it was to aim it. Contemporary reports laid out the paradox cleanly. The Los Angeles Times described him as volatile while recognizing he was the best rebounder in the game. And the same stories flagged that he was 34 age matters in the NBA. And the concern was simple. Could that motor hold? Could the Bulls keep him engaged without losing the room? San Antonio's urgency told its own story. After the standoffs, the Spurs wanted out. Interest across the league was muted, and Chicago's offer of Perdue, who had been a reserve for the Bulls, matched San Antonio's need for size and a safer personality. On paper, it looked lopsided in a strange way. Perdue gave the Spurs a traditional big who set screens, protected the rim in schemes, and didn't need touches. The Bulls, already flush with scoring from Jordan and Pippen, weren't shopping for points. They needed solutions to a very specific problem, exposed by Orlando's front line the previous spring: second shots and interior control. In 1994-95, Chicago's rebounding profile sagged when the game slowed and the ball came off the rim against bigger lineups. Shaquille O'Neal and Horace Grant punished them on the glass. That was the hole Rodman could plug the moment he laced up. Chicago's risk came with an operating theory. In the triangle, a low-usage forward who screens hard, keeps possessions alive, and defends multiple spots raises the ceiling without stealing air from Jordan or Pippen. If the Bulls could keep Rodman's focus on those margins, the scoring burden wouldn't shift. But the math would. Extra attempts. Fewer opponent runs, cleaner defensive trips. Jackson believed that freedom off the court, paired with firm performance demands, could maintain buy-in across the roster. The veterans would tolerate the act if the effort showed up nightly. The age flag hung over everything. A 34-year-old forward with a recent history of fines, suspensions, and absences isn't a standard foundation piece. But rebounding isn't only vertical leap. It's anticipation, footwork, and angles learned over thousands of misses. Krause bet that those tools age better than isolation scoring or shot creation. Jackson bet that the player who agitated in San Antonio could channel the same intensity into discipline once he felt trusted. Chicago didn't bring Rodman to shoot. They brought him to tilt the possession battle and sharpen their edge on defense. The price was low, the need was high, and the coaching staff believed they could manage the rest, which set up the next dilemma. You're acquiring a legend and all the luggage that comes with him. So the first task was understanding the package. Dennis Rodman arrived as a 2-time champion from Detroit and a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, but also as the player San Antonio had just benched after arguing with coach Bob Hill in the Western semifinals, who fired up 2 threes in the first 5 minutes of Game 2, refused to join huddles, and walked straight off after the buzzer. He led the league in rebounding 4 straight seasons from 1992 through 1995. He was 34, with heavy mileage and a reputation that shadowed him into every building. The Spurs years were a stress test. He still vacuumed rebounds, but the relationship with the organization frayed. The public headline was behavior. The basketball part didn't disappear. That's the puzzle. How do you judge someone whose impact decisions, boxing out, switching, sealing, rarely show up in points while the headlines do? Even the front office in San Antonio wanted a reset. Their general manager, Greg Popovich, summed up the mood as addition by subtraction just to have him out of town. When a team says that about the league's best rebounder, it tells you how far trust had slipped. Rodman's file read like two players. One was the technician. He studied arcs, read how corner threes kick long to the opposite slot, and tracked who backrims under fatigue. He played with a low center of gravity, got inside leverage early, and won with timing and second jumps when bigger bodies could only lunge once the other was the rule breaker. He skipped huddles, refused to enter at times, and collected fines. Coaches lost patience. When those stories pile up, evaluators start to discount the craft. But the craft leaned on anticipation and positioning more than on raw explosion. Rebounding rewards reads and repetition. And those traits can last if the legs still answer for 30 minutes. Look around the early 90s landscape and his numbers cut through the noise. In rebound percentage, the names everyone knew, shot-blocking centers and bruising power forwards, couldn't match his rate over multiple seasons. Whether the competition camped near the rim or carved out space with size, the trend held. He beat them to the spot and to the second touch. That consistency is why 4 straight titles on the glass mattered more than a single hot year. Chicago's question wasn't whether the skill existed, it was whether the room could handle the package. It came in. Phil Jackson had to draw a line where the team felt protected and Rodman felt trusted. Could he meet him halfway without losing veterans who had their own standards? That balance would decide whether the gamble elevated a contender or pulled at the seams again. The Bulls weren't buying points. They were buying timeless currency, positioning, relentlessness, and switchable defense that didn't siphon touches from stars. If those things held, wins would follow because possessions swing games, and he tilted possessions as well as anyone alive. Timing made the calculus urgent. Chicago had been pushed around by size and length the previous spring. They needed someone who could erase second chances and harden the interior without changing their offensive hierarchy. That was the appeal of a low-cost, high-impact specialist with baggage. You accept the noise if it solves the need, which brings us to the state of the roster when the bet was placed, and why a 47-win team saw upside in inviting volatility. They needed a jolt that would change how they competed in heavy games, and that's where chaos had a purpose. Why the 1996 Bulls needed chaos starts with spring. 1995, Chicago went 47-35 with Jordan back late from baseball, then lost to a young Orlando team in the second round, a letdown for a group built on June standards. That series put their weakness in lights, size, and rebounding against elite frontcourts. The prior exodus up front, Horace Grant in 1994 free agency, plus veterans like Bill Cartwright and Scott Williams, left the interior thin. When the pace slowed, second shots swung games away from them. Jordan and Scottie Pippen were still elite, but the roster lacked a stabilizer who could control the paint without touching the offense's pecking order. That's where the risk sat. Could Dennis Rodman patch that hole without cracking the trust forming around Jordan's comeback? Chicago's brass believed the upside justified the noise. They targeted a specialist who lived in the margins, someone who would tilt the possession count and stiffen the defense on contact nights. Jerry Krause reduced it to value. Series tilt when you control the glass and string stops. The market had cooled on Rodman because of headlines, so the cost dropped to a backup center. That bargain let Chicago chase an all-time ceiling while keeping depth intact. Instead of paying for more shots, they paid for the plays before and after a shot. The rebounds, the switches, the seals, exactly what failed them against Orlando. The triangle offense made the fit straightforward, and it doesn't need an essay. In that system, a low-usage forward who screens, occupies the dunker spot, and extends possessions is worth more than his points. Rodman didn't require post touches. He could free Jordan with a pin down, keep space clean for Pippen's drives, and then turn misses into extra chances. Those extra chances stack quietly. You could see the ripple effects in simple terms. When the glass is covered, wings don't have to crash and gamble. That keeps transition defense set and legs fresher for late possessions. 4 or 5 second chance points a night don't make highlights, but they decide fourth quarters. If Rodman delivered those margins, offensive efficiency would climb without new sets, and defensive efficiency would improve because more possessions ended with one-shot cost mattered too. Chicago traded Will Perdue for an all-defensive impact at a fraction of the usual price. That preserved shooters and connectors who made the triangle hum, players who spaced, cut, and punished traps on Jordan. It was a construction bet as much as a talent play. With Jordan and Pippen already carrying usage, the smarter ad was the player who made their shots cleaner and the game calmer in key moments. This answered the two biggest problems from the previous year: rebounding and frontline defense. Rodman checked both. He could body bigger fours, switch for a couple of dribbles, and still beat centers to the ball. He wasn't brought in to be a third scorer. He was brought in to kill runs with a putback, and a tough possession with a box out, and absorb the banging that wore down stars. The plan looked sound, but making it work meant managing everything that came with him. The next step wasn't a schematic tweak, it was a human one. How Phil Jackson would set the rules, bend a few, and keep the group pointed at the same target. Managing the storm. Phil Jackson's bet meant building a framework around a singular personality without losing the team. The season opened and the noise followed Dennis Rodman into Chicago. Early 1995-96 looked chaotic from the outside. Missed practices made headlines. Hair colors changed week to week. The celebrity scene was part of the package. Inside the building, the focus wasn't image. It was whether the group could uphold a tight standard while one player operated in a different lane. Phil Jackson leaned into a method that matched the problem. He didn't try to make Rodman conform to a template. He carved out a role and set firm guardrails. Off the court, there was room for expression. On the court, the demands were simple and non-negotiable: sprint, screen, switch, rebound. Jackson put it plainly: they would try to keep Rodman down the straight and narrow, and the path to that was clarity. Treat the outlier like an outlier, but make the expectations crystal clear. The locker room watched closely, and the initial skepticism from Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen was real. Exceptions can break trust if they aren't earned daily. Jackson kept the standard tight and visible. Be on time for film, know the coverages, own the glass. If Rodman crossed a line that hurt preparation, fines followed. If the behavior was loud but didn't cut into work or effort, there was selective tolerance. The veterans took their cues from whether Rodman turned the leeway into production on the floor. Early games eased doubts. In an early season home blowout against Boston, and then through the first long road swing, his energy translated into extra possessions. He crashed from the weak side and kicked out to shooters. He set bruising pin downs that freed guards. He bodied on the block, then peeled to the perimeter and slid with a forward without fouling. Those plays don't trend on highlight reels, but players feel them. When a team strings 3 stops capped by a hard box out, buy-in rises. Jordan recognized the value fast when the work showed up every night. Jackson's psychology-first approach relied on constant dialogue. He set expectations privately, then let results speak. The staff stayed in contact with team leaders, keeping the room aligned. When Rodman missed a practice, the response hinged on context. Was he locked in on game night? Did he know the scout? Was the energy there the next evening? The bar never dropped on court demands, and that made the occasional pass away from the facility survivable. Rodman met him halfway with habits most people never saw. He watched film on shot arcs and how misses travel under fatigue. He studied how a right-wing 3 tends to kick long to the left slot and how a mid-range pull-up from the elbow often dies on the front rim. He pre-boxed before the shot rose, lowered his hips, and used second jumps when bigger bodies were stuck in cement. That alignment, freedom in life, discipline in craft, fit the framework Jackson built. The exchange stayed simple. Jackson provided space. Rodman delivered possession swings and defensive stops. Every time he backed it up with effort, trust expanded. By mid-season, Jordan and Pippen had shifted from wary to bought in because the results were tangible. Calmer fourth quarters, shorter opponent runs, cleaner defensive trips. From there, the conversation moved from "can we manage him?" to the on-court math that his rebounding and defense created, how a single miss stopped being a 50-50 ball. So the conversation inside the team shifted to something simpler: how his rebounding changed nights. How does 14.9 rebounds per game at age 34 break opponents mentally? With Dennis Rodman on the floor, a miss started to feel like a Chicago advantage. By mid-season, players stopped celebrating initial stops because another whistle, another scrum, another reach usually followed. That wears a team down as much as any hot score. Rodman led the league at 14.9, but the number barely explains the grind he put on bigger bodies every night. Centers tried to bury him under size. Power forwards leaned and rode hips. He answered by setting position early, dropping his base, and making first contact so the second nudge belonged to him. He didn't chase the ball, he chased the angle. His craft lived in details most viewers never track. He studied trajectories and shooters' habits and moved before the ball left the hand. He boxed out before the catch, used a low center of gravity to win the first shoulder, and tipped to space instead of trying to snatch through traffic. When it fell short, he beat longer arms with relentless second jumps. He worked the glass like a sequence: seal, absorb, tip, collect, kick. That preparation wasn't a myth. He put in off-hour work mapping where misses traveled from corners, wings, and elbows, and he learned individual tendencies like how certain right-handed pull-ups tend to kick to the opposite slot. He even tracked how teammates' shots bounced and adjusted his spots accordingly. The result was anticipation that made him look a step faster than taller men, relying on a reach game to game. You saw the edge. Against traditional fives, he wedged inside, felt the shove, and used that pressure to slingshot toward the ball the instant it rattled free. Against springy fours, he bodied first, then met them at the second jump. The box score confirmed consistency, but the real effect came in timing. Offensive boards to open quarters, defensive cleanups that ended long possessions without fouls, and quick taps to guards that created instant runouts. Chicago's offense gained quiet points from those scraps: a kick-out three after an offensive board, a reset that let Jordan catch his breath and go again. Those possessions stacked into rhythm without new plays. Defensively, his work functioned like a reset button. He switched onto power forwards, held ground without ceding the block, and drew charges that cooled momentum. The pattern wasn't loud, it was relentless. The cause and effect showed up in how Jordan and Scottie Pippen attacked. They devoted more energy to scoring and playmaking and less to crashing from the wings. Their legs stayed fresher late, and their decisions sharpened under pressure. The team didn't need highlight putbacks. It needed one more shot per trip and one less for the opponent. Rodman supplied both, and teammates trusted that the floor would tilt their way if they stayed organized around him. By the third quarter, you could see opponents sag the extra wrestling, the second and third efforts, and the understanding that long rebounds weren't escaping Chicago's grasp chipped at resolve. The boards became the Bulls' pressure valve. Games bent in their favor before crunch time arrived. That's how the season started to accelerate. When the margins show up every night, the screens, the seals, the box outs on tired legs, wins stack fast and the schedule begins to feel lighter, which sets the stage for what came next: a run where every small edge arrived on time and a record season took shape. By mid-season, the story had a name: 72-10, the muscle behind the myth. Chicago didn't float to the top. They hammered their way there with a routine that never softened. The Bulls finished 72-10, led the league in offensive rating at 115.2, defensive rating at 101.8, and owned a plus 13.4 net rating. The numbers matched the eye test because stars scored and one forward took on the jobs most players avoid. Night after night, the grind was real. Rodman absorbed hits on every screen and fought for space on every miss. Distractions swirled, whistles followed him, and yet the baseline tasks remained. He walked into games knowing contact would pile up and calls could swing against him. That didn't change the plan. He set hard picks, carved out room under the rim, and chased the ball like each possession stood alone. When the roster felt fatigue, he leaned on habits. The dirty work defined the stretch from winter into spring. Rodman's screens freed Michael Jordan into clean catches and gave Steve Kerr that extra step of air. He turned box outs into erasers, wiping away second chances before they started. On loose balls, he dove, tipped, or simply arrived first, flipping empty trips into fresh clocks without glancing at the scoreboard. The Bulls' rhythm came from those small repairs, stitched together over 48 minutes. Defense made the separation obvious, but the description didn't need to be complicated. Rodman took primary duties on power forwards, who ate up lesser defenders, slid on angles, and switched long enough to funnel drivers back into help. That steadiness kept the backline organized and the scheme intact. The rankings told the same story the film did. With a 115.2 offense and a 101.8 defense, balance held even when shots didn't fall. Possessions that would have ended in scrambles settled with a rebound, a hit ahead, or a reset pass. The plus 13.4 net rating wasn't a hot stretch. It tracked across the calendar because Chicago could win ugly and then win clean certain nightstick. In a tight January game, a late screen freed a mid-range jumper, then a box out against a taller five sealed the next stop. In March, a tipped offensive rebound turned into a Kerr three that broke a tie with 2 minutes left. A drawn over-the-back foul on the glass bought a breather and 2 points in another fourth quarter. These weren't headline plays, but in the room, players remember who cleared traffic when everything tightened. Chemistry grew alongside the win column. Scottie Pippen trusted the back line because the glass stayed protected. Michael Jordan chose aggression, knowing a miss might return to him inside 3 seconds. The wings stayed balanced, the corners stayed filled, and the triangle kept flowing because extra possessions arrived on time. Rodman's presence let the scorers be scorers, which made the offense feel inevitable. Late by spring, the machine was balanced. The Stars handled the points. Rodman controlled the margins. The results were runs, then streaks, and finally, a number that stood alone. The regular season proved the model. Controlled chaos at the edges with disciplined execution at the core. The only question left was whether that same formula could stand up when whistles got tighter. Scouting narrowed, and every rebound mattered a little more than the last. June needed proof. June got it. Playoffs, Seattle, and the fifth crown on the glass. Can controlled chaos win the last 4 games that matter most? Chicago's playoff march in 1996 suggested the answer. They blitzed through Miami, New York, and Orlando, then finished the postseason 15-3 after beating Seattle 4-2 in the finals. The Supersonics brought length and speed with Shawn Kemp, attacking from the weak side, Detlef Schrempf stretching and cutting, and Sam Perkins pulling size away from the rim. If Rodman's value lived in the margins, this matchup dragged every one of them into view. Across the entire postseason, he averaged 13.7 rebounds per game, production that traveled from series to series. The series opened in Chicago with a 2-game punch. Seattle tried to change pace, switch coverages on Jordan, and test Rodman in the scrum. Whistles were quick, bodies hit the floor, and each rebound became a small negotiation. Rodman leaned on early contact and inside leverage. He sealed a half beat before the shot, then used quick tips to guards rather than wrestling for clean grabs. Those taps flipped possessions without inviting strips. When Kemp crashed from the weak side, Rodman took the blow, spun off, and reached space first. Game 2 showed how those habits swing a quarter in a game. Rodman finished with 20 rebounds, stacking resets that restarted possessions, and cutting off a Seattle run with a defensive cleanup. The pattern repeated after halftime. An offensive board that turned into a reset, a defensive wall-off that ended a long Sonics trip, and another tip that sprung a break Seattle defended well enough to hang, but the extra chances tilted Chicago's way. Seattle punched back in games 4 and 5. The series moved west, the building surged, and Kemp pushed tempo. That's where Rodman's counters mattered. He baited over the back fouls by stopping early and absorbing contact, and he fought for front position before the catch so post feeds floated just high enough to disrupt rhythm. He tracked where missed threes kicked and slid to the open slot instead of wrestling under the rim. Those reads produced second-chance points when the offense tightened. Then came the closing stretch that framed his impact. Late in key sequences, he dug out multiple offensive boards in a single trip, wearing down bigger bodies that had size but not the second jump. He chased long rebounds off Perkins' pick-and-pop misses and flipped the ball out before the defense reset. He closed quarters by ending Seattle's last look with 2 hands or a controlled tap, denying the momentum play the Sonics needed across the series. The box score confirmed what the film showed. He posted 20 boards in Game 2 and 19 in Game 6, and saved his most punishing offensive glasswork for the clincher, putbacks, and extra clocks that buried rallies. Each time Seattle trimmed the gap, a new possession appeared from a Rodman seal or a scramble he turned into order. That postseason capped a 5th straight rebounding crown at age 34, separating him from the field in both volume and timing. He didn't win by out-jumping giants. He won by beating them to the angle, hitting first, and jumping again. The Bulls didn't need a third high-usage scorer. They needed the player who could take 4 or 5 possessions per night and swing them to their side. Teammates felt it. Jordan focused on closing because the glass was covered. Pippen sat in passing lanes knowing trips would end cleanly. Phil Jackson's approach, trust tied to performance, held when patience and precision under contact were required. When the buzzer sealed a 4-2 win, the lesson settled in. In June, details decided outcomes. Angles before the shot, effort on contact, timing on second jumps, the same traits that would frame what came next. And that brings us to the simple takeaway that sits beneath the noise. At 34, Rodman proved that details beat headlines. Angles before the shot, effort on contact, timing on second jumps. Those habits turned a volatile risk into a championship catalyst and reshaped a contender's ceiling without touching usage. So if controlled chaos can anchor a 70-win pace and close a June series, who else sits in plain sight right now? Uncomfortable fits with elite, repeatable skills that flip possessions without needing touches. Look at the rebound savants, the screen artists, the rotation aces who erase second chances and create quiet points. We'll keep digging into the players who tilt outcomes beyond the box score. Subscribe for the next deep dive.